What's going on, everybody, and thanks for stopping by. Today's project is this string trimmer, and the problem is that it broke in the last video when I was trying to repair it. Today we're going to open the engine up and see if we can figure out what happened to it. Now this is not a repair video, so I'm not worried about putting things back together. However, if you're still interested, I will show you the majority of the disassembly process. In a previous video, we were spinning the engine over when all of a sudden we lost all resistance from the engine. I'm not sure how or why, but we lost all engine compression very quickly. If we take the spark plug out, we can see that the tip has made contact with something, more than likely the piston. As you can see, the resistance from the pull rope is basically the same as before, even without the spark plug being in. So let's start by taking the plastic covers off, starting with the top cover. Now the fuel lines are still attached to the primer bulb, and we're going to need to remove them, but first let's take the filter base off. This will help us figure out what lines go where, just in case we need to work on another unit like this in the future. We're going to have to remove almost every piece of plastic cover on this engine just to look at the connecting rod, and if we need to, we'll also remove the top part of the engine to look at the piston. Now take off each line, noting where each one goes. I've never had to deal with a primer bulb that has 3 ports on it, so this is for my education as well as yours. Now once all that's done, we can now remove the carburetor from the engine. The next thing to remove is the recoil assembly. But before we move on, let's drain the oil out so we don't make a mess when we remove the oil pan. Well, there's definitely plenty of oil in the engine, so I don't think it failed because of a lack of lubrication, although it is a little bit dirty though. Before we can take any more plastic pieces off, we have to remove a rivet that connects the recoil assembly to the muffler cover. Now the recoil assembly is in great working condition and it'll be kept for parts, just like the rest of the parts that's coming off of this engine. When removing the fuel tank, make sure you keep the rubber grommets, otherwise the fuel tank will be loose when you install it in another unit. I did want to take a little break and show you that the connecting rod is still connected to the piston and in one piece. So if I put a screwdriver in the spark plug hole and turn the engine over, I can feel the piston moving up and down. So we know that that's not the problem, but I still want to take the oil pan off to take a look around. So the pan bolts have a lot of Loctite on them, so I'm going to break them loose by hand before using my drill. Now the oil filled tube is kind of in the way, so we'll have to remove it so we can get to some of the other bolts that are underneath it. I'm not really sure at this point if the fan needs to be removed to allow the pan to be slid off of it, but let's do it anyway. I had to take a large Allen wrench and grind it down with my grinder to have 5 sides instead of 6, and then put it on the jump start shaft. So to keep the engine from spinning, I had to wedge a very large screwdriver on the flywheel side of the engine as I turned the jump start side. Then use an impact to take the jump start shaft off, which is threaded onto the crankshaft. Well, it looks like I didn't really need to do that because what I thought was a crankshaft was actually basically a PTO shaft off the back side of the engine. So here's the rotating assembly and everything looks just fine. It spins like it's supposed to, but it wants to stop near the top of its travel, so there's something on the other side of the piston. So here's a look at that PTO on the oil pan. This is a pretty smart setup as it doesn't connect directly to the crankshaft and should save a lot of time on the assembly line. So to remove the top part of the engine, we've got to remove the plastic piece on the intake side of the engine as well as the muffler. And after that, we can finally remove the 4 bolts that hold it to the block. Okay, so here's the piston, and to get a better look at it, I'll clean off some of the oil. Wow, this is really bad. So it looks like part of the piston broke off and basically destroyed the entire engine. So the debris basically gouged the side of the piston and the cylinder wall and resulted in a major loss of compression. I'm also sure that the debris is also embedded in the valve seats as well. So if I had to guess, the piston broke and closed the spark plug gap and stopped the engine immediately. Then when I was spinning the engine over with the electric jump starter, the debris inside the engine destroyed the cylinder wall and the piston. That's why I had an immediate loss of compression. As for a root cause as why the piston broke, I couldn't really tell you, but if I had to guess, I'd say that it leaned out at wide open throttle and the cylinder temperatures got too high and melted the edge of the piston and then destroyed the rest of it. So my question to you is, what do you think happened to this engine? Do you agree with me or do you have another idea? I'd like to know what your thoughts are. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I hope to see you in my next video.